And what we're going to do, I have a set of files here all set up in RX. I'm going to work in RX4 today. And I do have permission to talk about features that are in RX5 that are publicly disclosed at this point. But most of it, we're going to talk, the principles are all the same. So we'll take, I have about 4 files, 4 examples. I have too much material. I have enough things that we could probably go 90 minutes easily, maybe 2 hours. And I'm going to do a subset of that. Understand that I'm going to skip some details. I'm going to go as fast as I can. I'm kind of a house on fire when I'm doing this. I do skip some things. I don't mean to be rude. We have people at all different levels. Some people are already been doing this a year. Some people have been doing this 15 minutes, and they're right at the very beginning. So if I skip something, be sure to join us in the Facebook group and ask questions, and we can go over other details later. So I'll do as much as I can to go over as many details and cram as much material as possible. One of my biggest goals for today is to show you some things that are possible. And then in your situation, it will have to be modified simply because one size doesn't fit all. And while I can give you starting points and tips and tricks and things, I can't help you with the ears. And there's a whole thing, I'll talk about that here in just a minute. So I'm going to switch over, and every time I switch screens from me being live here to the software, there's about a 5-10 second delay as it switches over. So we'll switch that. I put on my glasses so I can actually read. I have my reading glasses here. I try not to be rude and glare. So here we go. This is RX4. We're going to do some denoising. Let me put the software on, and then we'll talk about some of the details. Here we go. I love live. Live is always interesting. You never know what's going to happen. I see Paul there, and Genevieve, and JL. Thanks for joining us. All right, there's some others there too, but I'll leave that for that now. And I'm rearranging the screen here, and you can see RX. Now you'll want to take this full screen best you can. I'm going to move this down just a little so you can see it. And I have a file here that has some fan noise, and I'll show you this is the same room with no audio. He just, the gentleman that sent me this, he sent me 15 minutes of his room with nothing in it. Then I have something that's going to show off. We're going to use the magic wand and select some things. This is a D-click example. If we get to it, I'm not optimistic we'll get to it simply because it takes a while. And in this case, this one, there's an airplane that's flying in the background. And this one's really hard to hear over the wires. It's easy. You can see the airplane in the bottom section here, and I'll do some things to make it easier to see that. And I'll talk about how to find things that are difficult to see and how to change the screen there. And then this is a bonus clip that I doubt we'll get to. There's some noise here that we could take out easily. So here's our starting point. We're going to do the easiest thing first, which is just simply go through and denoise and discuss the principles related to denoising so that you know where to start from. But do understand, this is starting. This is the way you want to start. This is not the way I do it in every single case. I'm skipping some details. And hello, Dan. Thanks for joining us. All right. So first thing we do, I'm going to come in here and select a tool. I live on a couple of these tools here. Let me give you a couple things that are important. I tend to live with the looping enabled because that allows us to go in and highlight a section. And when we choose play, the audio is going to loop. And I just tend to have that on almost, I don't know, 95. I always have it on, and then I turn it off in the few cases where I don't. So I live with it on. There's also 2 buttons down here that are important to understand the differences between them. The regular play is just like every other VCR or every other piece of audio or whatever your DAW is, where you press the space bar here, and it's going to play, and that does what you expect it to do. This other one is actually very, very interesting. This is play frequency selection. Because we have different tools which allow us to select subsets of the audio. If I have the lasso tool, then I can select something. Also, by the way, if you stop, it'll reconnect for you. So I don't have to select everything. If I'm trying to do something like this, you can see I just start, draw, and wherever I end, I've just ended. When I let go of my mouse, it will complete that for us if you happen to be using the lasso. And you definitely want to get good at the different tools and painting in, and you can fill in the blanks here. There's also some ways to make this that if you hold down this for a little while, you get the ability to adjust the brush size, because sometimes, I'm too lazy to draw it all in manually. And I'll go over some of that. If we get to the airplane, I have to use the brush tool to get the airplane sounds out. And first you have to select them, and they're just not a normal shape. And I'll show some of that as well. So in other words, when you're denoising, when you're working on audio, this is like a paint program in some respects. And you do want to explore the different selection tools and understand what they are and how they work and just the basics of them. You don't need to be an expert with them, but you certainly want to understand that this is very, very different than selecting the complete frequency. Oh, and if you're new to this, so this will not be new to people that have been around this for a while. I'm looking at the spectrogram. And when you start off with RX, it's going to be in this display where you're seeing both the waveform view that we see in many DAWs, and you see the spectrogram in the background. So if you wanted to, you could simply go over here and you could see it this way. Oh, I should let you know when I got this file, this is how it arrived to me, and I'll explain why this is hard to work with. But this is the view we see all the time, but I live over here. So I think by default, when it comes out of the box, when you first install it, you're going to be in the middle. And if you're working with audio in terms of enhancing it, this view is much better. And at the top, you have the high frequencies. At the bottom, you have the low frequencies. So we have a nice little scale over here. I'm actually going to even change that a lot. And then we also have an intensity tool here on the right, where you can see that the quieter a sound is, the darker it is in this view. So this dark here represents nothing for practical purposes. And then the brighter it is, the louder it is. But you can, and I do often, if I'm working on something, I can grab this and change the intensity. And then the rule in RX is, if you've done something like this where you've tried something different, as soon as you double click on it, it'll put it back to its default. And there's some other things I'll show them as we go. But so here's some audio. And we're going to talk about denoising. And you probably know, oh, let me put this out here. I have a tendency to work with this compacted. And the reason is I like the extra screen real estate. So the modules over here, there's a little arrow button. And this is how I tend to work, because I know what the icons are. But at first, don't do that. You want to have the words. It just helps make it easier. And then after you're more experienced, when you've been doing this a while, then grab the extra real estate by hiding that. But I'm going to start with it open. I'll leave it open. I might close it in the middle of it. But we're going to go to denoise. So what's the first thing that we would want to do with this? Well, first thing is I want to find out, what am I working with? And so I'm going to go in to begin with and run some statistics on this and say, all right, what did this guy send me? And the first thing I notice is, gee, this thing's quiet. The total RMS here is minus 42. That's kind of where I want my noise level, not really where I really want my total. And he's peaking at minus 25. So can you denoise this? Sure you can. And if we really get into it, it's about ratios. It's not about absolutes. But in this case, I don't like it that quiet. What I'm going to do to begin with, before I start anything, and I'm going to switch this over just so you can see what's happening here. I'm going to take the gain control, and I'm going to get this closer to where we might have it for ACX or for an audiobook or whatever else I'm doing. There's just almost no way it's going to be here. Now, I'm not a fan of normalize. Oh, let me say this. I'm normally not a fan of normalize. Normalize, and a lot of people use normalize. And if you want to have a discussion offline with it, I'll explain why. In a demo, I'll use it. And for very specific purposes, I will use it. But I don't like it for a lot of things. I would prefer to use a limiter combined with a gain control and do some other things. But I'm going to normalize it just for fun here. And that will get us some signal so we can see that you can see all this here is dirt or noise or room tone. There's probably a breath in there. And now let's now remeasure this again. Under waveform statistics, now we're going to get an idea of what are we dealing with in terms of the whole file. We're now at minus 22. We actually are meeting the ACX specs, basically. So you can see here that we're up here at -5 for our peaks based on what I have selected. If I really get the whole file, then you're going to see that I'm at -3 because that's what I ask it to do with the gain control. But and we're sitting at -22, so that's that's good enough. I want to be within range, so the first thing I'm going to do if I'm going to denoise, I like my audio somewhat close. It doesn't have to be perfect, but what I don't want is this initial state where it is so quiet. That also means later at some point. So if let's talk about why I do this. Let's say I clean this up and I get this absolutely perfect, and it has no noise, and it's just meeting the specs, and it's beautiful. And then a few minutes later, I realize, oh, by the way, I have to amplify all this dialogue that when I play this, you won't even be able to hear it. It's so quiet. Um, all my noise level is going to come back up again. Then I get to denoise the whole darn thing again because all my noises come up. So first thing I'm going to do is make sure I'm within range. Now, most of the audio that I'm working with, most of the audio you're working with, by the time you get to RX, you output it from your DAW, and you're close to the range that you want to be. And because you're close to the range that you want to be, then that's cool. So now I can also use this same tool, and I kind of live with this open. Now I have to say I cheat. Okay. Matter of fact, I'm the laziest, hardest working, probably the hardest working lazy guy you'll ever meet. I do all sorts of things to make my life easier because I'm always behind, meaning that I've got more audio to process than I have time. And so I have dual monitors. Invest the extra 100, and if you're on a PC, it's $120 to get an okay monitor, and it really makes things easier. So this is always sitting on my other monitor, but for right now, I'll put it on here. And if I was working with it here, once I know it, I also go into preferences. By the way, there's a little wrench up here, and then under that, I'm going to find my display. And I'm going to, if I only have one monitor, I want to see through my dialogues once I know them. And I might set that way. I don't know if you can tell over the Hangout, but now you can see some audio behind it. When I'm working for the Hangouts, because people are new and they haven't seen everything, I'll leave it to where it totally blocks. So this would be open on my screen. It would be open on another screen off the screen to where you couldn't see it. But I get a feel for this. So watch what happens when I do this. It now is measuring what's going on in between here. This happens to be a breath. I recognize it. I know what it looks like. You will too. But I'm trying to just get a feel for how noisy is this thing. Well, right now you can see that it's coming in at -48, and that's just not good enough for anything. Everybody will hear that no matter what they're doing. If this is not below -60, everybody is going to hear it and everything that they play it on, pretty much. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but I'm that kind of guy. Personally, I'm shooting for my peak levels here to be in the upper 60s. -68 to -72 is where I'm shooting. You will see people do this. Don't do this, but you will see people. I'll show it from the menu. How do I get it from the menu? I never do this from the menu. Process, and I want to silence. Let's shift S. Okay. People will do this. Now, can you see? I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of snow up here. Oh, let me change the intensity. So I changed the intensity there. And what you can see is snow, nothing. Snow. All right. Now, if I measure this, watch this. I go ahead and select this little region here and have this would normally be open. I'm at -infinity. Do not do that. And the reason is this. There is no place in the world that you and I can go that is at that level. And people, untrained people that have never, done any ear training, they don't do editing, they still are going to be able to say that does not sound right, because -infinity is no sound. And there just isn't a realistic situation in our life unless you went to there's a couple rooms in the world that are worth millions of dollars that get down to a really low level, and they're not even at -infinity. And you just don't encounter it. There's sound in all of life, and the contrast is what people hear. So don't do that. All right. Control-Z is your big friend there. We'll get rid of that. So I measure this, and I saw what that was. And like I said, this window would be open on my other screen. I have to keep closing it while we're doing the demo. And here's what we're going to do instead. Most people are going to simply go in and they're going to open up the denoiser. and they're going to go ahead and they're going to say learn, because you can learn, and you actually, let me back up before I do this. There's two types of denoisers here in regular, and by the way, I am using advanced, but I'm not going to use any features from advanced. I'm going to assume today we are talking about RX standard. So even though you'll see a couple things, there's some advanced settings here that are really slick. If you really know what you're doing and you have some hard cases, advanced has some tools in here that are just killer. Plus, it taught me a lot about how it works in terms of the quality levels and things like that. But I'm going to use everything that's in regular. But I have two denoisers here. I have a dialog denoiser. I'll throw that one over on manual. I have a spectral denoiser. Dialog denoiser, should be easy for me to say, is set up for no latency, zero latency. And so therefore, it's a very lightweight denoiser that if you were doing a podcast and you have the right software, you can plumb in RX, and in real time, you can go ahead and use this. And it's really designed for people that are working and they're recording directly to a DAW, and in real time, they are taking out noise. So if you were outdoors recording, if you're in a remote location, and it's really good. I have actually my oldest son, I use the Dialog denoiser on his stuff because him and I tricked out his room where he records, and it's really great. And it just needs a very, very light denoising. And Dialog works great for some people. And you really don't have to know very much about Dialog denoiser. You can set it in auto mode, and it'll figure it out. And if I do that and process it through, it doesn't take very long because it's very lightweight. And what it did, and we can remeasure this same area that we were in before. We're now at the peaks are at minus 47. So watch this. I'm going to undo that, and I will select the same area, and you'll see that it brought it down at about I don't know. We're just going to call that 7 dB in there. I may have selected a slightly different area between the two, but the Dialog denoiser is a real slick tool. If your room is very well tricked out, you will see that the Dialog denoiser in automatic mode will do something. So I don't know if you can tell over your screen. It's a little bit difficult in the Hangout, but this is definitely a darker color, but dark light is not the way to measure it. Use the waveform statistics and get an idea where your peaks are. There are some people in the ACX world that do what I call cheat, and it's okay. I mean, you can do whatever you want. You don't need to listen to me. If you want to, you can go ahead and use this total RMS, and you can say, okay, that's good enough for me. You can say minus 54, that's a decent number for me. I use a peak level. If I have sounds within my room tone that are peaking, this is my little meter right here, right at the top. That's the one I'm looking at, and I'm measuring the noise floor between words. If I switch this back on, you'll see that I'm between words. I'm not in the breath. This is the breath here, and I'm measuring it right here. That's not the way I do it, but this does work in some rooms. This isn't my audio. This isn't my room. This is what somebody sent me. They live in an apartment, and just recently somebody decided to put a ceiling fan in. I don't know if it's below him or beside him. And the ceiling fan, all of a sudden, if you see this nice little line down here, I'll show it to you in a minute. This is now showing up in their audio if they record when the neighbor has turned on their ceiling fan. And that's not fun. So the gentleman actually called me and said, hey, how do we take this out? And I'm going to take this out for you in just a second. Now, what else he did was he recorded the ceiling fan all by itself, and now this is the same room with the ceiling fan just running and him not talking, nothing for 15 seconds here. And that's kind of interesting. I should tell you, bonus tip, I record 5 seconds at the beginning and the end of every recording that I do, which I have sitting there. I no longer really need it. After you've been doing this a little while, you definitely don't need it, but in the beginning, it's really, really helpful to do that, because you can use that to do what we're going to do here, which is called learn. So here's what most people are going to do, and then I'll show you what I do, and we'll go ahead, and you see this line down here. Now, a couple things. First, I get back in the view that I live on. I'm going to move this over here, and I'm going to close this to make it a little bigger. First thing I do is if I'm looking down here, I want to see what's going on down here. So I'm going to change the scale. This is a big deal. Frequency scale, switch this over to log, and now you'll see it's changed and given us from 100 to 0. Watch this. I'm going to change it back. Frequency scale. The default is mel. And you see at the bottom of the scale from 100 to 0, it's a fairly small. I'm going to call that a 3/8 of an inch. I don't know what it really is. I'll have to get out my rulers. And then now you see from 100 to 0 is an inch. And because size does matter when you're looking at audio, then extended log now extends that out. And now from 100 to 0 is, I don't know, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. We'll just call that 2 inches for discussion purposes. Now I can see this on the low end. What is that? You see this little line here? This little line, I'm going to highlight it this way. From here to here, I'm going to just call that 120. Now, here's an interesting thing you can do if you're really looking for some of these little spiky things. Watch this. We're going to take this, and we're going to go over here, and we're going to pull up another tool that they have called the Spectrum Analyzer. And whatever you have highlighted, by the way, you can drag this around. If you drag my area around, it's going to change this display. So in real time, I can go through and I can do this. And this, if I put my mouse over it, what did I say? It was at 120. This is implying that it's about 119.9. So hey, I blew it. I was totally off the mark. I think I said 120. But you can see that peak. That represents this line here. And there's a scale over on the right. So if you look at this and you extend this over, and really if I scrolled over a little bit this way so that I get it, there it is. You can see that's about 120. That corresponds to this here. So sometimes I want to analyze something, and this really helps if I'm looking for noise. There's a peak. You don't have to know any of this stuff. Really? I should just do it the easy way. So let's zoom back in. We're looking at that. You see that there? That's really clear. Let's go back. Here's what we do. Here's what most people are going to do. They're going to go ahead and take the denoiser, and they're going to train it. Denoiser, you know, the funniest thing in the world for me, cracks me up. RX is one of the smartest programs in the world, and most denoisers are stupid, including this one, meaning they have a hard time telling what's noise and what's sound, or what's good sound. To the computer, sound is sound in most respects. It's really sophisticated when they can do this adaptive stuff and figure out that's sound, that's noise. And they really can do that, but only lately. When you see this here, this thing is going to learn. We go through spectral and we learn, and what it just did was it looked at this little strip of audio that I have highlighted, and it took and figured out, okay, there's sound here. This is really sound to it. It doesn't know specifically that this is noise, but it does. It's making a good guess at that. And then I've got a couple sliders over here. Now here's the default. By default, your reduction is going to be together. And by default, as you do this, the yellow line is where we're going to end up based on this. Now I'll give you a couple hints here. Bonus. I like somewhere between 8 to 15-ish. And don't take those numbers. It really depends. The more experienced you are, the more you can mess with that. But I'm just going to say somewhere in the 8 to 15. You can go lower. Lower's never a problem. If you're ever going to have any issue, it's that you do too much. But lower is not a problem. So I'm gonna start at 12 as the default. 12 is always safe. So I'm gonna take that, and then all you do is unhighlight. So now if you have a single point highlighted here, then it is going to do the whole file. And when we process that through, you see this one takes a little longer. It estimated 20 seconds to do this file. And remember, when we did the dialogue, it just went through and probably did it in about 3 seconds. It's a much lighter weight, and it works great on about, I don't know, 60–80% of the audio. But if you have something that's a little more intense, I live on spectral, just probably because I learned that first. But now, when we go through here and we look at this, depending on what I set it, look at my numbers here. A minus 59 in this little thing, which means even though I still see this little stripe, it's still the highest that's going. Just because I can see it visually, it doesn't matter when I measure it. My peak there is minus 59. That's not too bad. If I take this out, oh, look at this. Loser, loser, loser. I already had the dialogue denoiser going, so I'm going to take that all out, remeasure it. See, when you're doing demos, okay, you know they say don't drink and drive. Well, don't do demos and do this either, okay? I wasn't drinking, but I had already done it. So let's take this, and you can see this is at minus 39 right now. Make sure I learn the profile based on what I have there, and I can do this and process this through. And when I process it through, now bonus. If you have a long file, pretend that you have a 30-minute file. A lot of times I will test it on a small range. So I just highlight this little range and I will process it through. And then that way it just has a lot less work to do if it's doing 10 seconds as opposed to doing 30 minutes just to test. Because I can do my measurement and say, oh, I like that or I don't, and I can listen to it. And you just don't need, there we go, it just did that. And now I'm going to measure this here and I'm at minus 53. All right. So if I do before that, what was I at? Can anybody tell me? I was at minus 39. See, I don't remember. And then you have your undo redo here, and I redo what I just did, and I remeasure it here, and you can see that it's telling me I'm at minus 55, which is pretty darn good. Some people would be happy with this for ACX. I'm not. That would bother me. I can hear that, and when that comes up, and a lot of people can. And then there's a group of people out there that don't realize, they don't know why, but you know, your audio sounds good and mine sounds just okay because I'm skirting the edges. I'm, you know, if I'm not doing it super well, then normal people don't know why yours sounds better than mine. They just know it does. So let me show you how I might do this for real. Now, this is what most people are going to do. And really, I may undo this again. What you could do is somebody could just take this here and pretend I did the whole thing, and they could just push this a little harder, and I'll go to 20. And you know, RX is so good at this stuff. It actually could do this pretty well. I don't like it up at that level usually, but it'll do it, and most people will never hear the difference. It's very sophisticated in terms of what it's doing, in terms of even behind your audio. So you can do that. Notice how much lighter this line is here. And when I measure that, I'm now at minus 63. I wouldn't do that, but you could do that. A lot of people do that. But it works. And what I can say is, if you make a mistake and overdo it a little bit, you're okay. But if I'm up at 20, for most situations, you are far better doing 2 at minus 10 and then repeating it rather than doing 1 at minus 20, adding 20. Usually 2 light passes are going to be better. They're different. They're not 100% equivalent. There's a whole thing about there's noise behind our audio. So here's dialogue, somebody speaking, and there's noise behind it. And if I go more aggressive like I just did where I was up here at 20, it's going to do a better job of taking the noise out behind these words. But for most people, what they only hear is the noise between words. And because that's what most people hear directly, then usually 2 passes at 10 as opposed to 1 pass at 20 are going to give you better results for what we want for dialogue. All right. So that's how most people are going to do it, and that's okay. And let me show you now. I'll show you a couple little tips, or the way I would handle this. First thing, I'm going to switch this back to regular log, just because I'm used to working it this way. I'm going to go back here, and we're back at our initial state. I'll do it after the gain where I turned it up. So I have turned this up. Our overall audio is sitting here at minus 22. Our noise level for reference, and this is what you're constantly doing. You listen, and then you use some tools to measure. So you're always going back and forth. The final judge is your ears, or should be if you're experienced enough. If you're brand new to this, here's one thing I'll promise you. 6 months from now, you're going to go, wow, I watch the news and they have so much voice, they have so much mouth noise. The background noise in that is terrible. And the more you do this, the more you start going, I watch this TV show and in the background I heard this and that. Now the actors, and when I'm talking, I hear my mouth noise. That took me a little while. When I'm listening to somebody else live, I hear their mouth noise. I've learned to ignore it and just go, whatever. I can ignore it, but I hear it. And you will too. And the average user doesn't always know why yours sounds better if you've cleaned it up and yours is really sweet. But it does sound better to them. And when they listen to hours of audio, it makes a difference. If you do a very short test with people, here, listen to 30 seconds of my audio, they always go, oh, that sounds great. If it has a lot of noise behind it, if it has a lot of noise between the words, it will bother them when they listen to an hour of it or 20, even 20 minutes of it, and they won't know why. So watch what we do here. First thing, I cheat. Okay? I don't want my audio, I don't want my denoisers. I should tell you this. Denoisers are young. I consider them toddlers. Um, there's a tool called EQ, and the EQ tool, and see, I should pull this out so you can see what I'm doing here. And all right, equalizer right there. Now, the equalizer, let me turn this off. High pass, low pass. I'm going to take some out of the low end, and this happens to be a gentleman's voice, so I'm going to start this at 80. ACX, nothing will get through over this. If I'm doing music, totally different. Do not confuse this. If you're a person and you've got an audio background and you've been doing music, then you are going to do this differently. Okay, it's not exactly what you won't do this. You won't cut off that high end. I'd be very upset if you did that to my cymbals and my drums and my singers and lots of other things. But if you're doing audiobooks, then you can cut it off. You can even go lower than this with no problem. But in other words, at the low end, at the high end, I'm just going to process this through, and it's going to take out some of that. And the reason is this. An equalizer is a tool that's been around for 40, 60 years in different forms. Analog ones were around when I started recording in the late 70s. So I don't know how far beyond that they go, but they've been around a long time. A denoiser is young. Denoisers, good denoisers, are less than 5 years old. The math and the processing power to do this well has only come about. So this tool takes a lot longer. You can run your equalizer on 30 minutes of audio, and it takes it 10 seconds, 20 seconds. A denoiser is going to take it a lot longer than that, okay? So I use the equalizer to get rid of things at the low end that'll never be heard in an audiobook. And because I happen to have a male voice here, and the gentleman, maybe James Earl Jones type, Barry White, has this great rich voice, and he goes down a little lower than some, I had it set up at a certain spot for him. If yours is at 80 for a guy's voice, you can usually go up to 100 for many men without any problem. Ladies, you could even go a little higher. It just depends. But in other words, I knock out a bunch of stuff at the low end. I knock out the stuff at the high end. I want the denoisers, the declickers, all the things that are operating on noise that have to be really smart, where they have to differentiate between good sound and bad sound. I want to give them the least amount of audio to work with. And that's going to minimize but never eliminate artifacts or extra things. Because what if there's a sound down here and it tries to process it, and it usually does a great job, but every once in a while I'll get an artifact in something. I don't want to deal with that. So I knock out the lows and knock out the highs. The next thing I do is, this little line here bothers me. So rather than try to do everything, I'm going to do a two-phase denoise. And phase one, we're going to use this other tool, the time frequency tool, and we're going to select the bottom, just like this. And then we're going to ask it to learn. And then it's going to yell at me. Now, I don't know if you can read this here. Let's read this. It says, noise profile is not captured at some frequencies. Complete it? No, I know what I'm doing. Okay. It's always going to ask you that when you only do a partial range. But what you see is down here is this little line. This is what's going on right here. If I wanted to, I could go a little higher. I could pull this up and learn this like this, and watch this line here. These two lines are going to extend over to the right when I learn. And now it asks the same question. Now, I want to knock out this little bit here. So I'm going to do this, learn, and then watch what happens. I'll even do the whole file here. So now I'm doing something that's probably not what everybody does, but I'm going to go through and take a pass. And even though I have a single point selected, it's going to take the whole file, and it's only going to process everything from 0 to about 150 here. And watch what happens when this processes through. It's running spectral denoiser, and it's running, and it's got 20 seconds to do that. And I should have just selected a subset, but by the time I go back and restart it, it had been done anyway. So now it's going to be done, and it's working its little electrons off, trying to say, okay, you just wanted this little subsection. That's fine, I'll do that. And boom, now this line is gone. And what you're going to see when it comes to denoising is a lot of the energy in your audio is this low end. And watch what happens when I measure this with, let's use this tool here, time. I get this down here. And all I've done is denoise it. Now, let me take before that so you see what it is here. Let me go back to where we started. At this point, we started at minus 39. We're just going to watch this top number for right now, minus 39.89. We're going to call that minus 40, okay? Then we go in here and we run the equalizer, and we knocked out some of that low end. And when you start measuring, just knocking out the low end, we're now at minus 45. And we have these stupid minus numbers, but the more minus, the better. Okay, don't say it that way. The more negative, the better. But that's still the truth. So we're trying to get this to minus 60, and that's a minimum. And that's all I've done is the equalizer, but I already made a positive difference doing that. And then I went through and I did spectral denoiser here, and I measured it one more time, and now I'm at minus 54. So let's do one more thing here. Let's kind of zoom in a little bit on that so you can see. Make it a little easier, move my dialog boxes. These are almost always on another screen for me, but for you, I'm going to work with them all on one screen. So you can see that right there, that's not too bad, and I only did 10. I have a lot of headroom there that I could have done and probably should have done. Let me undo that. Control Z is your friend, and as you're learning this stuff, you'll Control Z 100 times. Now what I'm going to do is what I would really do. I would uncouple these two controls. I happen to know this is called tonal noise. This snow in here is noisy noise. Now, I didn't name these, so don't get mad at me for that, but this is broadband noise. Broadband means it goes from the top to the bottom, and so that's the broad range, top to bottom, broadband. So that's how you can remember that. Tonal is like when you do yoga. I'm sure you do yoga, and I do yoga every single day, and you go, or you're meditating. That would probably be better. When you meditate, you might maintain a single tone. Well, that's tonal noise. This is tonal noise. Don't let somebody confuse you. I saw a video one time where they said they confused this and they didn't want to do too much tonal because they thought it would change their actual dialogue, and that's just lack of understanding, we'll say. But instead, what I'm going to do is tonal, you can push much harder. I told you, I don't like to push this. Once I'm getting into 10 and 12 and 15, even though it works fine, I'm going to do 2 passes on that usually for the noisy. Broadband, I don't push that as hard. Tonal, baby, I pushed this thing just killer hard before, so you would not believe how many times I'm up here at 20 and 30. You do have to listen to it, make sure it's working, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to go in here and push the tonal, 28, broadband, 10. Now I'm going to process this a little bit here. And then by doing that, 5 seconds later, I'm going to watch this line right here. Boom. Look at that. That is just totally gone. That's just a non-issue. And what's happened is my noise floor, because I've taken out that one little fan noise, look at that. I'm already sitting there at minus 59 for that little chunk. And let's make sure that I'm getting that right. Yep. So that's pretty darn good. And all I did was go 10, but because I still haven't really done a full denoise on this. All I did was got the low end to match the high end. And because now this is all the same, by the way, I then go through here and I add a preset. And I'm going to call this low end remove. And the great thing is in the future, I never have to come in and resample this if I have the same noise. If you're in the same room all the time, you don't need to resample every time you do it. Save yourself a little preset, and then later, when you're more sophisticated, you can set up a batch processing, and I'll go to mine, for example. And in here, when I get to denoise, I have a preset, which is my minimal. My room's pretty good, and so I have a preset for myself that is named this. And so because of that preset, I can use this in the batch files, and because my room doesn't change, I know that I can come in and use one of my presets for me, and I don't have to re-measure and re-grab and relearn, okay? Save yourself some time, set a preset. So we'll call that low end remove. I'm very explicit. I mean, I have them for a lot of other people too. As I'm working with their audio, I'm setting up presets. But now I've got the low end taken care of. So now I'm going to go through and now learn across the full spectrum. And then you'll notice that I don't have to do very much. Now what I'm going to do is take this on the second one. you'll notice that if I do this tonal, because it's been taken out, there really isn't as much in there that's tonal that I have to worry about. It's now pretty equal from top to bottom. You see that? It just snow, top to bottom, snow, snow, snow. So in this case, we can now take 10 out, and I could link them back together. I'll do that the lazy man's way. There's a couple other things you can do with this curve here. As you're more sophisticated, there's a bunch of things I'm skipping, but I'm going to take this. I've just learned. I'll set a new preset once I like it, but let me test it first. Let's just do this little section here. I'll process this through, and what you're going to see is the whole thing is really slick, clean. I'm only taking out 10, and when I do that and I measure it, I'm at minus 62 here based on what I selected. And sometimes you have to be careful with this. If you do what I mentioned early on, which is you selected something at the beginning of your audio, you put in 5 seconds of actual dead air, you can go measure it there, any place you have dead. And what I will do when I'm doing this in the real world is I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. I'm going to find in my audio another spot where it's kind of clean, and I'm going to measure in multiple places and just guarantee that I have, now this happens to be a breath, I have to find, this isn't my audio, but I have to find a spot where he didn't, let's see, where he didn't breathe. And what happens is he was breathing in this, okay? He's one of those narrators that breathes. Can you believe that? You get those sometimes. And if you do, there's just not enough spaces here. I can deal with it. One thing he did do is he gave us another file that just has that. If you have 5 seconds at the beginning of the end, you can do it too. And if you don't have that, run the Dialog denoiser, and it'll still handle all this stuff and do a pretty good job. So let's go back to this here. But you can see what we have is by doing a 2-phase, we can end up with a much cleaner sound than if we have a single phase situation. And let's get this all out of the way, and I'll set a preset here. And I'm going to go through. Oh, I also can see why it takes a little longer. We'll do that. And I'll set a new preset. I'll add preset, and I'm just going to say complete. And this is going to be phase 2, like this. Okay. Now, what that allows me to do is let's back all this out. We'll get back to the equalizer, and we're going to get back to a single thing. And the first thing that will happen is I'm not going to take all this time to do that. And I forgot the one thing. When you do this like I'm doing it in a demo, it's really dumb, because what I ended up doing was I named them with presets in the demo, and what I'm normally doing is I name things with dots and dashes, and I put people's names. I'm really explicit. I have so many presets, just getting back to them all is kind of intense. You won't have this whole same thing because you're not going to have. And then I'd have to remember complete phase 2. I don't even remember what I named the first one. So someone throw in the comment, what did I think I called it high end. Who knows? Okay. But it's in there in my list. I just have too many of them. And I don't, in the demo, remember what I did. Shoot. Anyone remember? Throw on the thing. Okay. Don't do that. All right. That's the joy of being live. So Hangouts can get wonky with connections. Try reloading, somebody said. So anyway, what you do is you pick your 2 presets, you go in and you run it, and you're going to just be able to repeat this over and over and over and over. All right. So I beat that to death. Let's recap that real quick. First thing you do, you come in and you're going to go ahead and you're going to run and make sure that it is within range that works. So your gain is it's loud enough. That's all we're talking about. It's loud enough that it's close to normal. The next thing you're going to do is use the equalizer, and I'm not really using it to equalize. I'm using it as a high pass, low pass filter. And I'm going to cut off the lows, and I'm going to cut off the highs, things that aren't going to go through to a book. Then I'm going to come through and I'm going to train it. I'm going to find a place in the audio where I can train it. And in this case, where I have a specific problem, a low end hum, this is a fan, I'm going to do a subset, and I'm just going to train it on this section here. And I'm going to do a phase 1 where it learns that, and we're going to take that out to begin with. Once that's taken out, then that would be here. And then we're going to go ahead And we're going to do the secondary one. And see, I had done it right here. There it is. Now that you can hardly see that line. And then I'm going to do the full spectrum where it does everything. And once you get, I'm explaining this, it takes an hour to explain it. When you do it in the real world, this takes me I already have the presets set up. I walk in and I'm going to actually put it as part of a batch process, because once it's set up for the same narrator in the same room with the same mic, with the same interface, you don't have to do all this stuff. All right. Hope that helps a little bit. All right, let's look at another problem or another issue. Let's say you have some noise in your oh, hi Beth, welcome. Let me see who else has joined here that I haven't given a shout out to. I see JL there. I see Beth, other people that I've talked to, and you guys. Comfort noise. Dan Carroll's here. Paul's here. What's the label above those sliders? Can't read. You have that means this. That's noisy and tonal. Noisy and tonal. This stands for broadband noise. There's also tooltips and everything. And then you have tonal noises. So if you're meditating and you do that kind of thing, then that's the tonal. That's when you get a straight line across your audio, and some audio is far better or worse. All right. Hope that answered that question. I think that was for Paul there. All right. Now, sometimes you have a specific sound in your audio that you're going to try to get rid of. And let me zoom in a little bit on this. And what isn't obvious here, and I don't think you're going to be able to hear it over the Hangout. And let's change my scale back to normal. All right, that's normal. And you can actually see right here, there's a noise, and right here's a bunch of noise. And I'm going to try to play it. I don't think you're going to be able to hear it over the Hangout, but what's going to happen is this. Yeah. Okay, I don't think you're going to be able to hear that. So I'm just going to assume that you can't. And if anyone wants to, let me know and I'll get them this file, and you can practice it. But I'm going to show you what I do in this case, where I'm trying to take out a specific noise. I can see it here. And because I can see it, once you can see it and identify it, then you can get rid of it. And there's a tool down here called the magic wand. And the magic wand allows you to, if you see something, this little noise here, I click on it, that's too much. I know, and oh, down here there's this play frequency selection. This is actually playing, I'll turn it up. I don't know if you can hear that on your end, you probably can't. It's just playing that little thing that's selected. And what I want to do is, there we go. This is actually, there's a noise in here that I heard, and the magic wand just caught it. Now here's a bonus. Most people don't know about this, or they haven't worked with it. There's something called the harmonics tool. And while I can play this and I have it looping, and you won't be able to hear this, but watch the screen. What happens is there's something called a fundamental, and then there's sounds that are mathematically are related to this sound. And so I have this playing in a loop, and then I have this tool, and now it just selected some more sound that's related, but it's higher in terms of the harmonics. And some of it gets into dog whistle range, but you have the ability, and sometimes so I'm going to stop that from playing. Sometimes you're going to have a sound and you see it down here. Well, there's some other sounds related to it. And as you're playing it in the loop, and as you turn on these other things, you will hear additional sounds higher up. And by taking them out, you can clean up something that just wasn't obvious to you originally. So watch this. I know I'm going to take spectral repair. And normally spectral repair, I'm using it in horizontal mode, which means look before, look after, make your decisions about how you're going to repair this. But instead, I'm going to use this one in vertical mode. And the rule is, anytime I've got something long and skinny, I'm probably going to go either vertical, or sometimes I'll go through 2D. But this is what's going to happen a lot of times. In this case, it's a perfect case to go vertical. I'm going to start with 2-3. I'm going to process that through. Oh, by the way, you can listen to what I have selected here by making sure that you use this button here, play frequency selection. I should tell you as a bonus, if you ever want, there's this great tool called invert frequency, and now it's going to play everything except for what I have selected. And you can evaluate what is it going to process. And so I'm going to switch that back. And in this case, I'm just going to simply run this, process that out, And what you'll notice here is that that's taken that all out. Now, it's taken out such little slivers that you'll never hear what I've taken out. And if we go here and listen to it, it sounds 100% better on my end. Now, through the Hangout, you probably won't be able to hear it. So this is one of those things that if you have a noise, and that's right within the audio, there was this little squeaky sound in her voice. And I can see there's one more spot that I would probably want to get rid of, which just happens to be right here. I'm going to zoom that in. You see this little bright thing here? I don't like that, and I could hear it on my end. Now, I've got these great reference monitors and a nice room, and it would be obvious to you if this file were local. Over the Hangout, it's not. Now, I'm going to try the magic wand again and see if it can get it. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't. So I'm clicking around in different spots. Now, it won't get that. So I go to plan B, which is I use my brush tool. I'm going to adjust my brush down to maybe 10, 12. I'll go like this. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to paint this guy in right here. And if you need to, you should know there's a couple modifiers. If I hold the Shift key, I can add to it. So the Shift key adds. Okay. If you hold the Alt, it subtracts. So let's say that I got a little too much here and I wanted to go ahead and just take off the little ends. So in other words, if you're not perfect with your mouse the first time, I'm going to start all over. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this right here, and I wasn't perfect. You can go back and paint. You don't need to be perfect. And then I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to start this playing in its loop. It's playing. I can hear it on my end. I'm going to turn on my harmonics tool, and I'm going to go and let this select. And on my end, I can hear it's actually selecting these things that they're hard to hear over the Hangout, but it's real obvious if you're sitting here with some good speakers that they're in there as well. And now I'm going to do the same things where I'm going to process this, and boom. And now that whole thing is gone, and that's going to sound a lot better. So we have two tools there. The magic wand, which often it can get some things, but not always. And then the other thing we have is the brush tool, which allows you to take and highlight any section, and then using some keyboard modifiers, depending on the Shift key, for example, is going to allow me to add things or add to this one. And I can add more and paint anything I want, and then apply a repair to it. And then I also have the Alt or the Option key if you were on the Mac. And once something's painted in, I can use that to paint out a section. So you have a great way to paint it. Because if you can't paint it or you can't see it, you can't identify it, then you can't figure out which tool you need to solve the problem. All right. So you do have to get good at using these paint tools and figuring out how they work to find a problem. Now we're going to take out a couple clicks here, because the other mouth noise thing that's a big deal for all of us is going to be clicks. Now I have an example file here, and let me go in and unselect. And I can tell just visually, just from doing this a lot. After a while, you do this enough, it's like reading X-rays. You look at your audio, and I can see some noise in here. I can not, but that what happens is originally, you can shut your eyes. It's a really good test. Shut your eyes, play your audio, and see if you can hear them. Now, I'm going to assume, since we're over the Hangout, that you're not going to be able to hear it clearly. Plus, who knows what kind of speakers you're on. But the Hangouts automatically degrade our audio. So I'm just going to tell you there's a click right here. There's a click right here. So here's what we would be doing with the declicker. What most people are going to do is they're going to have a certain selection like this, and they're going to take the declick tool, and they're going to go, now, first thing you do, preview. And because I'm previewing it, I don't want to talk over that. Because I'm previewing it, I also have mine set up in a loop, right? Because we have the loop tool turned on. And while it's previewing, it's going to loop over this range. And then I can, while that's happening, adjust this sensitivity from 2 to 7. And by the way, I don't remember ever going over, say, 6. If you get too high with these, you can introduce some artifacts. And a good way to test this to begin with is preview is great. You can use your ears and you can listen to it. Preview with clicks only is even better because you can hear what it's going to take out, and you can adjust it in real time and just hear the clicks. Now, there's some interesting things about that people don't really realize. Just because it tells you all the clicks it's taking out, it doesn't tell you what it's going to do with them. And the declicker will actually synthesize something. What it's going to do is this. Now, this is a simplification. I have a click here. The declicker is going to look before and after, and it's going to build a little piece of something and put it in its place. Okay, that's assuming it takes out this click. If it has a click over here, whatever it's going to do, you'll see right here, it's going to fix 29 clicks. And when it does that, it doesn't just put it doesn't do this. Take this, and I can go through in my audio, don't do this, and delete things. Okay, and that would be pretty obvious that that's not good. That's not how the declicker works. It actually is really, really smart technology that it's looking at what's around it and building a little bridge there. Okay, so it's pretty sophisticated in what it's doing. So we're going to take this here and we're going to highlight a region, and then we're going to take the declicker and we're going to play it in preview mode, and we're going to listen. The other thing I do all the time is, if you can't hear it clearly, ask it to do clicks only, and just ask it to process it. And what it's going to do is say, okay, at that sensitivity, I had found 5 clicks, and these are the 5. I only see 4, but there must be a very, very subtle one that if I zoom in even further, we'll see. And undo is your biggest friend here. Those are what it's going to fix, and that's probably not enough. So Control Z, undo. Run the sensitivity. Now, I very often will go extreme, and I'll process this. Now it found 93 clicks. Okay, and if you listen to this, you'll be amazed at what it's. Now it's quiet because those are low end. That's kind of extreme. I really wouldn't be doing that normally. I don't go that extreme. Instead of that, we're going to go down here 6 or 5. So we'll undo that. But it's a great way to test and get an idea of what it's going to process. Don't mistake what it's going to process for what it's going to take out. Let me say that again. Don't mistake what it is going to process, and it will show you the clicks it is going to process. It does not show you what it's going to, quote, take out, because it is going to fill these in with something else. So it's not just cutting holes in your audio that everyone's going to hear, but if you do too much, then it will leave some artifacts. So chances are I'm going to instead take this clicks off, undo, and try processing this with clicks only at 5 and see what's happening here. And that's probably a little more reasonable, but I'm going to listen to it, and I'm going to do this process and hear it. And then I'm going to go ahead and do one final thing here, undo, and I'm going to actually just go through and process it. And I always do a small section first and listen back. And then once I've listened back, I said, oh, that's really good. You can shut your eyes. It's a great thing. Shut your eyes and listen to it. And does it sound normal? Not. You can also, while you're previewing it in real time, if I run the preview here, I can also bypass in real time while I'm playing, and I go back and forth between bypass on, bypass off, bypass on, which is when it turns red, bypass off, and I'll keep doing that and listening, and then I'll adjust this while it's playing through and adjust it down and find the sweet range. What I can tell you is I do this for a lot of people. They send me their audio. I spend about 45 minutes on average going through and finding them denoise and declick ranges. If I'm doing their setup, I'm spending about 45 minutes auditing the audio, meaning checking settings, going too far, going too quiet, too little, too much, and finding the sweet range, and then dialing it in. And I play enough audio enough times that I usually end up, I just have figured out I'm averaging about 45 minutes of testing. But once you have it, you set yourself a little preset, and you add your preset, and then you can use it over and over again, because your audio is going to be pretty much the same. If you're working for other people, then you're going to have some things going on there where you have to test for every person, and that's okay. You get pretty good at it. But if you're only doing it yourself, you throw in a preset, it'll remember it. You can use that preset every single time. Life's pretty simple. I got all sorts of presets. And so first thing I'm going to do, find the range, do the whole audio. Second thing I'm going to do is, this bothers me. I can see it right there. After I've done declick, and I'll usually do 2 passes of declick rather than one very aggressive pass. Instead of up here at 8, I'm going to instead do 2 passes of 4 or 5. And I've had audio that I've done 4 passes because of what they sent me. All right. And that's okay. And it works amazingly well. 3 or 4 passes really low as opposed to cranking it up. And then here's a bonus. You can take a subset of this. And now if you look down here, that length, there's a little meter at the bottom. That's less than a second of audio. And frequency wise, I'm starting at 37 and I'm going up to 10,000. And now if I'm doing this small range in here, I can go really aggressive. I'm going to go 9 here. Kids, don't do this at home. And I'm going to process this through. And what you're going to see is even though virtually everything's gone, and I've tested it. I tested it last night. You won't hear it, but here's what I'll promise you. I'll send you an example if you want to hear it. No one will ever know I was there. I cranked this. It found 82 clicks. Oh, I should do this. So here's what's going to happen. Clicks only. Process that through. It processed 82, but because it's within such a small little range here, it's different. If I do that full spectrum, you'll hear it usually. But this is so sophisticated when it's operating on this little range here. Even though it took out 82 clicks, I listened to this. I promise you, nobody will know that I ever came in and I was that aggressive on a little range. Now, I don't recommend, don't. That's spelled DON''T or DO space NOT. Do not do this. Don't do the whole thing and say, process this at level 9. I don't know what you'll get, but you won't like what you get. Okay. Just too aggressive to do that. Control Z, undo. But I'll tell you what, it is gold when you have something like this where the regular, you should know this. Do not expect your declicker to get out 100%. I'm shooting for 80%. That's my target. 80% of the clicks are gone. For a lot of things, that's good enough. That'll be great. There are some things that I can tell the declicker doesn't think of as clicks. And I've been beating up Isotope, one of the developers there, saying, hey, I don't think your definition of click is mouth noise. And he's agreed with me. So someday, they understand. They've got a lot of audio from me, and we'll get every possible mouth noise out of there someday. But they understand the issue, and I'm sure it'll. Anyway, so what I'm telling you is this. On small sections like this, you can go in and use this thing hyper aggressive if you need to, and it works great. It'll just totally kill. So that's that. What you do is 2 declicks and then decrackle, by the way it works. Decrackle is like spectral repair, attenuate. It turns things down primarily. Primarily, it turns things down, which means I could be pretty aggressive on this and process at a higher level. So being up here at 6 doesn't bother me, but you do have to test it, listen to it, preview it, bypass it. And if you need to have good headphones or good monitors, and you need to have good ears. And if you've got those 3, if you've got some experience listening, you can really push this stuff hard in some cases. If you have a good room and you have good technique, you don't usually need to. As you become a more mature narrator, you can cut the number of clicks so you don't need as much processing over time, because you learn whether you need apple juice or to eat apples or to be more hydrated or less hydrated. You're chewing gum. There's 100 things people do to cut their mouth clicks. And the number one thing you can do is work on your performance. But there are some things, people send me things that their performance was great in terms of their characters, not great in terms of the mouth noise. And if you have that situation, you still can make it sound great if you use these tools correctly. I have an airplane sound here that I'm not going to show you. You can see that the airplane is right down here on the low end. And by the way, in order to do that, you would need to be out here at extended log. And now you can see, let me close these windows here. You have airplane, and an airplane flies over. It gets lower and lower the farther away it gets, the Doppler effect, for those who like those kind of things. If you draw a straight line here, you will notice that it doesn't correspond. The airplane noise gets lower. You notice it starts high over here and it ends lower. And the further you go in this audio, if you start over here, it's fairly high. and it keeps going lower and lower. So you can't just get a little section here. You can't, if you train the denoiser on this, it doesn't work, because where the frequency is here, when I move it over to here, this is lower. So you get to use this paintbrush tool here, paint this guy in, and you see that I'm missing some of it. But if I were careful and I went through and I get really close, and let's pretend I'm close, then what you do is you use the modifier keys and you minus and you paint out what you don't want. And then you use the shift key and you add back in where you need to, and you change your brush size. And once you get one of them in there, paint it in, and you get that painted in nice, what you can then do is go in and use the harmonics tool, and it will catch most of them. And if I do the bottom one, for example, or one of the lower ones, if I start off at the lower end and pretend I drew a perfect line there, then the harmonics tool will go through, and you can see it's grabbing the ones, and pretend my line was perfect there. And I can go through, and then I can use spectral repair, and it just takes it right out. It's just amazing. The big hard part is that you have to paint the thing in, and you're doing it freehand. And if I'm now, see, that's not too bad. I got pretty close there. And then if I and so I got really close, and then I click someplace else. So there that is. And then when you do this, it's right on. See, there's a mathematical relationship between all these things, these harmonics. And so you may have to do it twice. You paint one, and then because of the relationships here and the noise, you'll paint the second one. And once you've done one of them and there's a second one, then you can do it. So you may have to go through twice, and it's getting every other one, but it's a slick tool, and it'll take care of a lot of problems. So here's our recap here. Let me look at, I'm gonna scan the questions and answers. And Paul, I'll give you all the settings. I guess someone was having a problem getting it live. And Firefox likes me, I'm in. Okay, glad that worked for you. I got could the airplane be removed with the tonal denoiser? No, it can't. Actually, I didn't see your question there, Paul, earlier, but the reason the airplane can't be removed is it's changing. And so I did try it that way. When I first got the file, I thought, oh, the denoiser will work great on this, or the hum removal will work great on this. But the problem is it's totally changing over time. There is something in the hum tool, if you have the advanced version, that it will adapt, and that it'll actually catch this. And so this tool could do some of it, but I'm just assuming people don't have advanced. And in that case, you just have to draw it in freehand. And if you're not perfect, then you change your brush size and you use the modifier keys, and you can add and subtract. And it might take you 5 minutes to get the first line in there. Once you have it, then you can use this great tool here to catch all the harmonics. So you really have to do it once or twice, depending on what the lowest frequency is and how the harmonics are working and what the actual noise is. And sometimes you have to go in and find a little something that it missed and paint it in. But I did it. I actually did it, and I didn't save that file, and it's spectacular. When it's done, you couldn't tell I was there. You can pull out these little slivers, and no one would know. So that's an overview. If you're going to go in and let me change this scale here. We'll go back to Mel. Just to recap, you're going to make sure it's at the right volume. You're going to use your equalizer to knock out the top and the bottom things we don't need. If you have an extreme issue on the low end, you're going to do probably 2. And the first thing you can do is just train it on the low end, set yourself up a preset. And then after that one's worked, you're going to have it relearn again by finding a subset. Instead, I'm going to take this whole thing, relearn with the denoiser, the full spectrum here, like this. Pick your numbers. 10's good, 12's good. This thing will really work up to about 20. I pushed it harder than that in some cases, but kids, don't try that at home. If you've got great equipment and great ears and some experience, go for it. Ignore me. Do it. I mean, I've done it before. I've done it on 30, and it works great in some situations. Not most. I don't recommend you do that as a rule. But if you're anywhere under 15, you're in great shape. So if you don't have good ears, or experienced ears, I should say, don't go over 15. Just do multiple passes, and you're done there. And then you also have other tools you can use, like the magic wand, the brush, to find specific sounds. Combined with spectral repair, you can end up getting very specific things. Most of the time I'm sitting here on horizontal to take out sounds. If I want to take out a click, like see these things right here? Pretend that these were loud clicks. I'm going to go in with my rectangle tool or time frequency tool, and I'm going to paint that guy right out. And this is how it's set up, and I'm going to process that, and it's gone. I should tell you one other thing that's really interesting about almost all these tools. They are feathering in their repairs. They are not just doing the area you paint. They're very smart about this, and they will feather it in, meaning they will blend the audio before and after into my fix. And virtually every tool here does that. Very smart. They spend a lot of time making sure that every time you're changing something, that it's not just it's not doing this, because this is really, you'll even see this. Watch this. I just told it to silence this, and it won't do what I ask it to do unless I do something else. But that it's feathering it all in around the edges based on what's there. It's a very intelligent thing. It's not the same depending on what I do. If I close this is the last thing we're going to go over today, and I delete this, it is going to treat this differently than if I go over here and do the same operation. And the reason is it's not an absolute. And while at first you're like, no, I'm absolutely telling it, there is a way, if you absolutely want to get it, you can do this. But you almost never do in audio, because huge contrasts are a lose. And so if my fix area has an instant change that's too abrupt, then everybody will know I was there. And our whole goal in this is not to have it perfect, but to have it to where nobody notices you were in there. And all I have to usually do is make it a little quieter, and I win. So this went a little longer than it probably should have. I hope this was helpful for you. I skipped 100 things. I'm looking at my notes here, and we spent a lot of time on the basics, but if you have those basics down, they will serve you very well. And there's 100 other things we can go over, and I'll save that for another day. I'm scanning. I'll do my final scan here of the questions and comments, and I don't see anything here that we're really have to. Let's see. So Beth said, when you blow out the tonal noise, the low end remove you made, it doesn't negatively. Oh, no. So Beth, if you're still listening here, when I took out that bottom, RX is really good at taking out noise behind sound. So even though that line was sitting there, if I go back to the initial state, running through all my audio here, let me do it after the gain so you can see it. So you can see this noise, this hum actually runs under everything. And even though it runs under everything, it doesn't matter, because it will still gracefully take it out behind here and between here, and it will not bother that audio. That's the beauty. Noise reduction is, one of their specialties, and they've got some math PhDs that have spent crazy amounts of time, because it's easy to get the easy stuff in here between. That's no big deal. What's hard is making the mathematical decisions to take it out here and behind here when appropriate, without touching your audio here. And that's one of RX's strengths. It does it insanely well. Matter of fact, I'll just go on record. It does it probably better than anybody, any place. And it's why people are willing to invest money in this. They spend a lot of time with some very smart mathematical people making that work. And the theory is beyond just the basics of this, because they are actually having to make decisions about how to make that work. So it really will not impact, if you do this correctly, it doesn't impact no one knows we're there. I do it all the time. I fix things that people kind of go, oh, I don't know how to fix it. Now I can say, if you do it wrong, if you overdo certain things, you can have some issues, but really you do it right. You do it with some experience. As you get good at this, you can take that line out of anything. And I've taken them out in the middle and the top. It doesn't matter. This one just happens to be easy to see at the bottom, especially when I blow this up. And I didn't even show some of the other things I do to, because there's like 400 of these things. You can do this, and you can tell it to expand that view. And then now I'm just looking at this, and I can scroll up and down and see different frequencies. There's some different ways to zoom in, and I didn't do all of them. All right. I mean, I'd be here for 4 hours if I did that. I'm already way over time. So I do hope this is helpful. And if you have other questions, join us in the Facebook group. There's a whole Facebook group dedicated to RX and dialogue and narration and spoken word. And I'll put that link in the notes here. Most of you, that's where you found me anyway. And we're going to take this and end it for today. It went way too long, but I just hope it helps some of you. Hope you had a good time. Hope you got to laugh at me. Laughing at me is good. And I will stop this sharing and then say this, that I appreciate you spending the time with me. That's crazy, that much time. When you're doing this in the real world, you'll do it in 3 minutes and you're done. When you have your presets set up, you can do it faster. And what I'm really doing is, if you're in the same room, I'm setting up batches so that I can go ahead and take my audio and put it in there. And RX is excellent about, while you're running a batch, I'm working in another program, or I'm working in the foreground on this, and therefore I'm multitasking, letting the computer do the work, and it does it really, really well. So it's a great tool for saving yourself boatloads of time, and it's why people are willing to invest $300, or for the advanced version, $1,200 or so, to have a tool that will save you hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. Every single book, I'm saving 2 to 4 hours by letting it process in the background. And when you start adding that up over the course of doing 4 or 5 books a year minimum, and you just save 50 hours, what's 50 hours worth to you? The idea is to get out another book or another project or another voiceover, not spend time waiting around for the computer to do this stuff. So it does it well. It does it as fast as possible. It takes advantage of all the cores in your computer, and it multitasks really, really well. So it does a great job. And there's version 5 coming out here in another month. So if you're watching this a month from now and it's October or beyond of 2015, then you will find that there's an upgrade version, and they always tweak every little thing that they can so that they figured out something, and this algorithm is better and faster, and they just keep finding things. So I appreciate you spending the time on your Saturday, or if you're watching this later, or you're spending your time whenever you did. Now, if you've hung around this long, you deserve a gold star. And I went a little longer. I shouldn't do that, but sometimes it happens live. And I hope it was helpful. Let me know in the groups. We'll see you. Have a great day. Happy to talk to you. We'll do this again when RX5 is out. We'll do a whole nother session. I'll cut it down a little bit and just show you the cool things as soon as that ships in a couple months, or maybe you'll be watching, whenever you're watching this, it may already have shipped. Same principles are going to apply. We'll just have better tools in another month or two. They keep upgrading it. Have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.